What's up guys, you're watching Life by TCG. Bit of a different video today, no deck lists or anything. So there's been a bit of drama recently in the secondary market for MTG about buyouts of reserve list cards and increasing prices and all that. So I just saw this tweet yesterday or the day before from Saffron from MTG Goldfish. So I'll read it out. So, as sad as it sounds, your life will be better if you just pretend like cards on the reserve list don't exist. Depressing to see the history of the game killed by speculation, greed, and Wizards' inability to adapt with the times. But apparently that's where we're at. So that's from May 2nd. And that's an attitude that I sort of share right now. So just for anybody who's wondering, like, I have a reasonable amount of reserve list cards myself, so I just pulled out the jewels from my legacy deck here, and then I think if I go through the binder I might find a few more. Null Rod might be reserved, I don't know. Sorry if these offend your sensibilities, but it's Li-Fi TCG, not Li-Fi MTG. These are reserved, these are spiked like a stupid amount. Nothing exciting here. Replenish, I think that's reserved. Got 4 of those in here. Sorry if there's glare off the binder, I'm recording at night and this is the only lighting setup I can use, so a lot more jewels here, a few more jewels there, and more jewels here. So in some regards, like if you're like a person out there who's looking at Legacy and just thinking like, wow, I'll never be able to play, I can sympathize with that, and I'm obviously in a better position than you might be. But at the same time, I view the game from a competitive perspective. When I enter a tournament, I don't want to necessarily be held back by any financial considerations about what cards I choose to play. And it's basically getting to a point now where it just doesn't make any sense to approach tournaments thinking that mindset is realistic. If I want to play lands, if I decide that lands is the best deck, it just doesn't make sense for me to obtain those cards. For a number of reasons. So firstly, there's very little chance that I can recoup that cost from tournament winnings. Of course, it's very hard to do that for any purchase in MTG realistically, but if you're good enough you can sort of offset the costs at least a decent amount, and then hopefully make some money back when you sell them on. But with the prices as they are now, that's just absurd. Then also now with the interest in all of this, there's of course the issue of counterfeits. So you run the risk that either you end up purchasing one, or the counterfeits get so good that consumer confidence tanks, and now you can't sell your copy anymore because people just can't verify that it's authentic, or the counterfeits become so good that people are just only interested in buying counterfeits and nobody wants to pay for an authentic copy. Or any of these things are possibilities. Or perhaps the reserve list gets abolished. And while I do think that's something that should be done, the possibility of that happening, while I think that is slim, is discouraging for any further investment into those kind of purchases at this stage. It just seems like a bit too much of a risk. So you've seen all the stuff I just showed you now, just to sort of give my position on this a bit of context. Like, if they deleted the reserve list tomorrow, I would be perfectly okay with that. Like I said, I play the game to play the game. So that means I want there to be tournaments held with lots of people in them. And if people are priced out of those tournaments because they can't afford to play in them, then that's no good for me. And you see a lot of people state that attitude, and I just sort of wanted to put my money where my mouth is by showing you guys the stuff that I have. So yeah, so the other thing that I wanted to say is that I have talked with a member of staff from Wizards recently. I don't want to say who it is in case this is meant to be like confidential, like privately shared info. Well, he's like a well-known name from the development team, and when he asked me, if there was one thing you could change about MTG, what would it be? And I just, I said, well, the reserve list, definitely. And he did tell me that after the printing of From the Vault, was it Relics, the one that had Khan in it, and I think Mox Diamond as well. Wizards were subject to some kind of legal attack from either a collector or some sort of consortium of collectors, something along those lines. So when you see because that was about the time when they doubled down on the no more promo loophole. So that's apparently the reason why. So I'm not sure how true that is. I can't verify that. I'm not too sure why he would lie about it. You can sort of conspirate about, well, they want to sell standard cards, but at the same time, if they made a product that had the Power 9 in it, you'd imagine that would sell really well as well, So some of these arguments that people make were in the comment section below this Saffron Olive tweet. And I just wanted to go through some of this because, some of these are quite good ideas, like sensible, and some people are just being really stupid. So there's quite a lot of replies here. Got my mouse out, going to do some scrolling, so here we go. First reply: Legacy and Vintage without reserve list cards should be formats. And Saffron says, yeah, we tried that once, it didn't take off. And yeah, I definitely agree with his response to this. So Legacy and Vintage without reserve cards, I think you're just fragmenting the player base too much at that point. It's already overlapping with Modern quite a lot at this point. Like, you still have Force of Will, Brainstorm, Port, a lot of important cards. So the important cards you don't have obviously are Jewel Lands, Lion's Eye Diamond. And I don't think that this format would be that bad. But I think that not having access to the Jewel Lands just really disappoints some people, like it feels like you're really compromising too much. This feels like something that we shouldn't have to do. So moving on to the next So the next reply, dramatic much. This is in response to the original suggestion that we should just pretend that the reserve list doesn't exist. Or I mean, to pretend like cards on the reserve list just don't exist. And you know that's a very pragmatic suggestion at this point. The cost of some of these things are just ridiculous. Next comment, it's less speculation and more fear of missing out, combined with a legitimate low supply. When someone mentions a reserve list card, everyone rushes out to buy it for fear it will spike. This creates a self-fulfilling prophecy and the card spikes. And then Saffron says, I think this is somewhat true, although there are people who are very upfront about buying out reserve list cards. So yeah, I do think the supply is legitimately low, and that's something that Wizards should try to fix. You know, the problem is they say their hands are tied, you know, we're just going around in circles. But the stickiness of prices is also, it seems bad, but at the same time, like it seems to sustain, you know, like how can you say that it's just like artificial? Next, I wish they never closed the premium version loophole. Yep. Next, I agree with everything but the line about Wizards failing to adapt. Promissory estoppel is a very real thing, and unfortunately Wizards probably made a mistake with the reserve list, but we just have to live with it. No amount of crowdfunding could make a dent in those legal fees. So this thread is very interesting. So promissory estoppel is basically the idea that the reserve list is like an implicit promise that if reneged upon is grounds for like actual like litigation or being sued. So the reply, this is a good comment thread, so I'm going to go through all of it. Even if estoppel is a probably, that's a typo I think. Even estoppel is a probability, which is debated from what I've seen from various lawyers. There are a lot of things Wizards could do to lessen the problem, which they choose not to do because of the spirit of the reserved list. And then replying to Saffron, that's just the boring sad truth about it though. If a company thinks there is even the possibility of litigation, if they do something, regardless of how slim, they're going to avoid doing that thing at all costs. I think having reserved reprints on Moto is the best we'll ever get. So this is, I think that reply is dumb, and the response to it is better. So Taco Tuesday says, that's not how any company operates. They typically go with, will this be profitable, rather than will there be litigation. Even if there is litigation, if the product is profitable enough, they will go. I think this idea is very important. I'll just keep going through the thread. And then the counterclaim to this, they do not think solely about profits when considering decisions like this. They know it would be profitable to abolish the reserve list. It's largely about consumer confidence, which would be destroyed in the process of doing this. And then back to Taco Tuesday, the smart guy, he says, well, consumer confidence is a profit factor. And I would argue more confidence is destroyed by maintaining a hard cap to accessibility for the most iconic cards that have ever existed. And I totally 100% absolutely agree with this. Like, if you as a company decide that your children's card game deserves to be solely the domain of like wealthy speculators, you know, does that decision give a lot of consumer confidence for your audience? I don't think so. You know, like with the prevailing attitudes towards you know, income equality and all that, it seems to be developing throughout the world. Maybe I'm consuming too much leftist media, but yeah, I think the reactions from most of the community, if there is, sorry, I'm fiddling with my pen. I think the reactions from most of the community would be very positive if they abolish the reserve list, and that's partly why I made this video, right? To try and add my voice to that discussion. Keep going. Read this tweet 3 times, still stunned you chose those words. Yeah, well, that he was trying to convey like an important message. And Saffron replies, I mean, we're living in a world where people make videos about buying out reserve list cards. There are people who do MTG finance right, you included. Maybe this guy's a notable MTG finance man, James Chilcott. I don't follow this kind of thing, so I've never heard of him. But with such low supply, it doesn't take many people doing it wrong to cause major issues. Yep. And then somebody has a go at Saffron for like trying to make money by spiking weird cards in his deck text. Like, that's just silly, I think. I mean, even if it is true, it's besides the point. Next comment. I've said it before and I'll say it again. People who own reserve list cards want them reprinted. The ones against this are large stores, Star City, Channel Fireball, etc. And then Saffron correctly says, I actually think the large stores are for it too. At least Star City Games is on record for being in favor of ending the reserve list. That is true. You can find a quote from Ben Lewis around 2011, I think, and he was the like inventory manager or something for Star City at the time. Maybe he was, you know, even in charge of the whole company. I'm not sure. But that is definitely true. You can look that up. I think if you look at an old Star City article, it might have been part of the article with Stephen Menendian where they were invited to the Wizards of the Coast HQ to discuss it. Next comment, why not just say it is okay to use proxies of reserve list cards without the prerequisite of owning an original copy? It wouldn't be breaking their no reprints clause. And then they reply, I don't think Wizards want to allow/encourage proxies in tournament play, although this would be a potential solution, at least to some extent if they were. Yeah, so that's just a non-solution, right? Because if they were to allow this, then Wizards could just like print gold bordered cards to be legal in tournaments, right? And then, but then if they're legal in tournaments, aren't they just reprints, and that's breaking their reserve list anyway? Like this, to me, this suggestion just doesn't make any sense. Like I understand the desire to have this, but I don't think it solves anything. Moving on. Magic would not exist without the reserve list, period, so it wasn't a mistake as much of a decision. We wish they could reverse, but can't. Yeah, I don't have enough historical context to know if this is true or not, so we just have to take their word for it. Oh, that reminds me of like all the silly reserve list cards. I'll show you my favorite reserve list card that I own. Where's it at? Here you go. Wall of Kelp. It's one of the only reserve list cards that's legal in Pauper because it had the rarity downgraded on one of the MTGO Masters editions. So hopefully I can like top 8 a Pauper challenge, and this will go from like $1 to $2 or something. But go to the moon with the Wall of Kelp. Anyway, okay, now getting into sort of like dregs. If they're a bit of a non-comment, then I'll just skip it. Keep going. Okay, here we've got a comment from Baruch. This is like a pretty edgy guy who posts on MTG The Source quite frequently, which is a pretty decent legacy forum. Chinese fakes will eventually be so good that you can't distinguish from the real thing. The if that isn't already the case for most situations. China will grow larger. Yep, I think this is definitely a possibility. From a pragmatic point of view, even if you can determine it with some magnifiers and other tools, when your cards are like sleeved, or especially double sleeved, you know, the texture you can't tell, the finish you often really can't tell either. People in tournaments aren't going to be inspecting your cards with a magnifier. From a pragmatic point of view, it's already very, very difficult to distinguish a real card from a fake one. And this is a major reason why this idea of like just pretend reserve list cards don't exist like is a very practical philosophy to have right now. Unless you are like a die-hard collector and you really like get a good feel out of just owning the originals or whatever, then it almost just doesn't make sense. And maybe that's a bit cynical, and maybe if you have like a extremely high amount of integrity, then you disregard this idea. But it should be definitely a very real concern for any tournament players playing in these eternal events, and definitely a real concern for Wizards as well. Next comment: no need to worry, my friend. Someday soon Disney Corporation will buy out Hasbro. When they see the reserve list, they'll laugh, we'll laugh, and collectors will die a little inside. This is what we're hoping for, basically. This goes back to the comment I read before that was really good. You know, where they said, you know, don't worry about litigation. You know, that companies aren't strictly against litigation, they're only against litigation to the point where it impacts their profits. So if Hasbro / Wizards / hypothetically Disney figure out a way to get around that, then that seems like the most realistic way we can see the reserve list eliminated. Because, you know, it's the issue with so there's a few things going on here. So the first is the issue with the fakes. There's a really good quote by Gabe Newell, who is the developer, owner, whatever, of the Steam computer games platform. And his idea about piracy is that it's not necessarily an issue of price. I'm not sure, what's the exact quote, I'm not sure. Gabe Newell, piracy quote. Basically the idea is that Gabe Newell, he's the CEO of Valve. In general, we think there is a fundamental misconception about piracy. Piracy is almost always a service problem and not a pricing problem. You know, it's like the idea that, you know, if you make it easily available for people to get, and you know, people can access these things in like a nice way, then people will not pirate the stuff, even if it would be slightly cheaper to do so. And I guess based on, you know, the success of the Steam platform, his idea works there, and there's no reason why it couldn't work for MTG either. But the problem with Wizards now that's hampering this idea is that Wizards doesn't know how to create reprint sets. Both the two recent Masters sets have been like an absolute complete flop. You know, when you okay, so we've got like Fetchlands got reprinted relatively recently. They're all, I mean, all of the Zendikar ones at least are still over, or around or over like $50 each, I think. Rune Halos hovering around the $50 mark. Celestial Colonnade is as well. Even in terms of commons and uncommons, like Preordained is about, I think, $5 to $6 on Star City, something like this. But instead, you know, we're getting Tree of Redemption at the Mythic slot. Like, it's just baffling. Like, Wizards are way too afraid of pissing off secondary market people when they make decisions, it seems, in my mind. And we're not going to get any good progress in this regard, or in this area, until that attitude changes at the company. They seem to have like this huge aversion to the quote unquote like Yu-Gi-Oh system, where, you know, there's like basically like Chronicles level events every year almost. But you know, people cope. That game hasn't crashed. It's been going for the last 20 years or almost. Yeah, you know, like it just works. I don't know why Wizards seem so terrified of dropping the prices of cards, or like trying to do it in this perfectly fine-tuned way, you know? I'm much more afraid of prices going up than down, and I think most people share that opinion, and Wizards need to learn it. Another reference to the Disney idea. Want to sue Disney? Sure, I'll wait to see how that works. Yeah, that's a pretty good point. Maybe Hasbro is too scared. Second-hand market and buyouts makes it difficult to enjoy this game at times. Wish it wasn't all about money and value. Yep. Couldn't agree more. The fact that reserve list is still a thing baffles me. It's almost like Wizards is being held hostage by the players they made this agreement with. If the business model is to sell and make money, print vintage masters in paper, profit. Yep. I want to play Legacy. I also want to eat and pay for my kids' college, so I just play Standard and hope for a miracle. Yep. So, you know, this is really sad, to be honest. The reply: miracles aren't legal in Standard, but Legacy would be such a sick format if the mana bases didn't cost $1 million. Yep. MTG has gone from game to speculative secondary market for a very long while now. The game isn't really engaged for its own sake very often. It's partly why I have high hopes for MTG Arena with standardized value, although there's some work yet to do for card acquisition. Yeah, the online is like a separate thing. It's nice that we can play Vintage and Legacy and all these things online. But I don't think there's a good reason why we can't do it in real life as well. I gave up on playing Legacy or Vintage years ago. Reserve list doesn't have much to do with inability to adapt to the times. Wizards are pretty much legally obligated to maintain the reserve list due to their choices made in the past. And then there's some discussion about whether the estoppel thing is actually relevant or not. So just a reminder, like from what I've heard, the official statement is that it is. But I think if Wizards had like a bit more business sense, they could make enough money out of it that it would be worth it for them to go against that, even if that is the case. Shouldn't there be unobtainium in any collectible market? Otherwise, what would we have to shoot for? Okay, so this is a comment from Blake Miller, which is absolutely fucking retarded. Like, the problem is that it's not a collectible market, right? It's a game that people play. First and foremost, I think that's what it needs to be. And even if they did reprint the stuff, those originals are still out there. That's your unobtainium if you really love collecting. Like, those things still exist, they don't just suddenly disappear. That's just a really idiotic comment. MTG owned proxy vintage is a thing. I'm sad that you wouldn't acknowledge these great outlets to play reserve list cards for low to no cost. Yeah, I mean, people obviously know about those. It's just that it's not the real thing, you know. It shouldn't have to be that way. This guy sarcastically, but they promised reserve list is dumb and only hurting multiple formats of the game. Next comment, luckily Wizards has convinced legions of fans to invent a supposedly insurmountable legal obstacle that they themselves have never mentioned, thereby ensuring they have cover for their bad decisions. So again, I want to reiterate that they have mentioned this to me personally, so unless you want to claim that the staff are being deliberately dishonest, then I think we have to throw this away. The history of the game still exists. It's not dead because it's expensive. Define dead. I mean, vintage is pretty dead. Legacy is healthier, but heading in the same direction. Legacy today will suffer the same fate Vintage did, a fringe format that nobody plays because they can't get the cards or don't want to shuffle a deck that's worth more than their car. These formats will be doomed to online formats only, like Vintage is now. Yep. I think formats that rely on cards from the reserve list will absolutely continue to thrive through Magic Online. That might be true, but only because it seems like that's the only option we have. I think that we shouldn't have to rely on online. It's called proxying and it's glorious. It doesn't count. Got my 2 legacy decks and that's it. Reserve list needs to go, and anyone who thinks it needs to stay is only saying that because they are losing money. Yeah, you know, you can't really disagree with that. These cardboard prints should not be the prices they are. Yep. I would just remove the lands from the list. It would make a world of difference for Legacy. I mean, why would you half-ass it, right? That's just a weird suggestion. Slow news day. I mean, sure, maybe, but you know, the Saffron guy has got a lot of weight in the community. I think we need to remind Wizards about this as much as we can. You know, if we can get top banned by putting a sign in the parking lot, you know, maybe we need a Skyrider to get up in the plane and post a message about getting rid of the reserve list, because this is what I think is the most important issue for Magic at the moment. Totally agree. Worst part is Wizards do not seem to care about all that reserve list spike. They act like this is not my problem. I mean, it's part of Wizards' jobs to welcome people to play the game in any format. Yep. Because the problem is that a lot of people that work at Wizards, right, they're game designers. So they think a lot about like making the cards that are like new and interesting and do cool stuff. And decisions like, what's the recent, like the Planeswalker redirection rules change, like all of these modern aspects of the game, and the whole like theory and design aspect of it, like that's what they're really into. You know, they're not competitive players so much. They're not they're a little bit out of touch with this whole secondary market issue, I think. That's just my impression. I think that's a reasonable statement to make. For me, the fix is clear. Ban the reserve list in Commander. Print all non-legendary cards banned as legendary. It's a clear downgrade for non-Commander formats. With this, the stock should increase a lot from Commander decks that won't need the banned cards, and prices will go down. Okay. So what this guy's saying is that we should reprint legendary versions of all reserve list cards. So like now there's a legendary Underground Sea, but normal Underground Sea is banned in Commander. So Commander's the same, and then everybody gets their reserve list cards, but they're downgraded. So like the problem with this idea is that now we have like 8 Lion's Eye Diamonds and 2 Tabernacles and like potentially all this other weird stuff for Legacy. I think that's just way too convoluted of an idea. And then, you know, they probably won't even want to print print like this kind of stuff anyway. Because it's that whole spirit of the reserve list thing. Next reply, I'll enjoy a time when the Magic community actually appreciates the value the reserve list has had, not only for the game, but for creating a market that regular folks are able to make a living off of. The reserve list isn't about you, it is there for the betterment of the game. So here we have another idiot. So he's simultaneously trying to claim that the reserve list has a value for the game, but for creating a market that people can profit off of. So you can only have one or the other, right? If the secondary market is so exploitable by collectors, it's bad for the game. Maybe he's trying to make an argument about like how it carried the game through the Chronicles period in the past, but the existence of the reserve list now is definitely not here for the betterment of the game in 2018. If you think this is true, then you're a moron. The reserve list is actually preserving history, but okay. I mean, what does that even mean? More stupid comments. Like, all the alpha cards still exist, right? If they reprint Ancestral Recall, like, all the beta copies don't just spontaneously combust. This is just an absolutely idiotic statement to make. Proxies are gorgeous now. This is just driving more players to accept proxies. Yeah, but tournaments don't. So, what do? Just wait until the fakes get really good so you can't tell? It's such an awkward situation. Open up the reserve list. Those who will be so mad because of it will quit and sell their cards back into the market that wants them. I mean, that's what we want. Well, that doesn't solve the problem. I think everybody should just forget about a reprint of reserve list cards, and Wizards should put a focus on making those cards and their associated formats more easily and inexpensively accessible digitally instead. Yeah, so this is like a we've given up mindset, which isn't as bad as some of these previous comments, but you know, I'm hoping for a better outcome than that. You know, because like a lot of these cards are still stupidly expensive online. I mean, weirdly, the most expensive card online is like True Name Nemesis, I think, and that's not even on the reserve list. So the online model for controlling the secondary market prices probably could do with some work as well, but you know, I can't be too harsh on this guy's suggestion. The worst part is they have to know that the reserve list is going away eventually, just like it wasn't possible to keep them out of MTGO, but their insistence on even acknowledging anything to do with the reserve list is mind-blowing. So yeah, so the thing that I keep saying about like how the guy employed there told me about the litigation after the Khan thing. Why did they not make a public statement about this? They just like, because if you look at their communications at the time, it just mysteriously seemed that they just decided that to like make the reserve list stricter, even though discussions with like Ben Lewis and who's the vintage player, Stephen Menendian, they both seem to suggest in their discussions with Wizards that they should get rid of it. So it was really weird. I don't know why the communication on this part is so like out of sync with what's going on. But I think that the assumption that the reserve list is going away eventually, you know, that's optimistic, like we can hope. But I don't know why this guy seems so confident in that at this stage when it seems to go against everything we've seen so far. Next. Anecdotal to be sure, but I've heard from multiple people that they would happily cut their collection values in half if it meant that more people could play Legacy. I mean, yours truly. I mean, I showed you a lot more than the Wall of Kelp, right? And I got other stuff in other countries as well, even. I just want to play the game. Couldn't they just print the cards that do exactly the same with different names and art? Oh, I mean, Wizards is just too stupid. The reserve list is too stupid. Not necessarily speculation. People forget about cards as well. And pile spikes. People forget about cards as well, and spikes with no demand at a new price tend to drop back down. The only problem is supply, because I assure you speculators didn't make Underground Sea $500. That was players. I think it's a bit of both, and that's what the reply to that person who replied says. I'll read this post because it's good. It's investors and players both. There's a reason the Abyss is worth more than All Hallows Eve playability. That said, investors know that and focus on cards there's already a high demand for. Yep. And if the demand doesn't match the new price, it will drop back down when they need to move to a new spec. Well, not really, right? The prices just keep climbing. I'm all up for combining Modern and Legacy into a single format, Eternal, no reserve list cards, and start the new Modern at oranges. Why not? I mean, we could. So rather than run that and say why not, you know, the position I'm in is why. When just printing the cards would solve everything. Wow, like Wizards, like if we're gonna go down to the consumer confidence issue, like Wizards just continuing to dance around this is not helping my opinion of them. Sierra Angel has been reprinted like 40 times and Alpha is still over 400. Collectors want 2 originals. Sorry, typos on Twitter, man. Collectors want originals. Give us a functional reprint of the jewels. It isn't going to affect the price of alphas and betas. Maybe not alphas and betas much. Revised versions would probably drop a considerable amount, but that's okay. Reserve list is annoying and takes away from the game. Wizards of the Coast would make so much money off a set that had reprints. They'd cover their legal fees, shoot $20 packs. Come on, easy peasy. Originals would still be worth hundreds. Reprints would be worth hundreds. Well, hopefully the reprints wouldn't be worth hundreds, but I agree with this guy's sort of general attitude. That's why I'm leaving Legacy, a sad goodbye, but if something could be done, Wizards would have done it a long time ago. Yeah, this is almost where I'm at right now. It's getting to the point where things are just looking so unsustainable. I think there are better places to focus our energy than stressing about this. Well, not an argument. Like, what, we can complain about whatever we like. It's just a hobby, sure, but if it's going to shit, then we might as well talk about it. Seeing Sierra Sanctum skyrocket in price made me really sad. It was one of the last cards I want for a green-white enchantment EDH deck, but sadly it will remain out of reach. I mean, yeah, like, this is the situation. I always thought functional reprints with the text can't be played in a deck with the original, would fix Moxes and Jewels, but now so much is crazy overpriced that there's no real fix. Yeah, that just comes under the whole spirit of reserve list thing, I guess. For what it's worth, this aligns perfectly with Wizards' marketing strategy. They don't want you to buy old cards, they want you to buy new cards. So here's another idiot, right? If they put a new version, if they put Ancestral Recall in a pack that just came out of the factory and they sell it to me tomorrow, is that not me buying a new card? Like, why does it matter that it was designed in 1993 if Wizards made and produced it for me this week? Right? This argument is really dumb. Like, saying Wizards don't want to reprint the reserve list because they want you to buy standard cards. Well, then why are they printing like master sets? Do they not actually want people to buy master sets? I mean, with the cards that are in them, that there seems to be a conclusion that you could actually draw. But I'm pretty sure when they produce a product, they want people to buy it. That's just a really dumb argument. Reserve list is corporate policy, but we don't know what agreements, if any, Wizards has ratified with collectors with regard to the compliance to that policy. Also, there are zero economic benefits of abolishing the reserve list and a lot of risk and uncertainty. Well, obviously there is some economic benefit of abolishing the reserve list. Otherwise we wouldn't be talking about it. That guy seems pretty dumb as well. I really like the idea of allowing reserve list cards to be proxied, that, and I'd love to be able to know who was buying out what. I mean, sure, yeah, whatever. Like, there's just a weird idea about proxies, right? Like, Wizards just not going to allow it. The Wizards is much more likely to abolish the reserve list than allow you to play proxies in tournaments. And if you don't care about sanctioned tournaments, well then you just don't care about sanctioned tournaments. I mean, you're not part of the discussion. It makes Wizards so much money and adds a whole new element to MTG. I can't tell if this guy wants to get rid of the reserve list or keep it. They would impress Hasbro's sales team by just mass printing MTGO Cube in paper with all new arts and updated text for, say, $300 instant $signs. Well, that's actually like an insanely good idea. Like, that would be one of the best ways to release mass quantities of reserve list cards in a way that keeps the price high-ish. I feel like demand for this product would be absurdly high, but the idea of this has way more appeal to me than something like the Commander Anthology or like the Nicol Bolas Arch Enemy. Like, I don't even know what those have in them, honestly. This is a really, really good idea in my mind. If they ever get rid of the reserve list, I think this would sell so well. Yeah, just make a box set with a cube in it. That's a really sweet idea. Respect for this guy, Chris Niezensky. Can we do anything to even get a conversation going? And then there's a link to Mark Roosevelt Tumblr post. Let's open this. Why is that taking so long to load? Junk laptop. Alright, we'll come back to that. Wish they could just announce a time frame of we will reprint this card here and this card there. This gives people the out of selling their reserve list cards. Yeah, but like, even once you announce it, like at the point of the announcement, the value, the intent of the reprint is to bring the value down, right? So, I mean, the value would mostly drop at the point that it was announced. unless there was some like hugely important tournament in the meantime. And legacy tournaments just aren't that big. Like, I don't think this is a solution that really solves anything. Like, you just have to bite the bullet and reprint shit. I've bought a few that were really meaningful for me or just went in commanders I will play forever, but it's getting harder and harder to justify. The prices just keep getting manipulated far too often and easily. It's not even just corrections, but speculative. Yep. I think the logical reaction here would be to ban the reserve list card pool solely because inability to get those cards, and it causes a warp in formats like Legacy and Vintage. I mean, yeah, but this is like, that's the throwing the baby out with the bathwater answer. Vintage is a boring format anyway, and Legacy has like 2 or 3 tournament winning decks. Not too hard to ignore it. I mean, that's just your opinion, man. I quit recently because of the astronomical prices, played for 17 years but can't justify spending all the money anymore. Yep. Speaks to me on so many levels, makes me have to proxy cards because I will never be able to afford the cards I want for Cube. What's the newest buyout after Mox Diamond? Humility. Apparently is over $100 now, wonderful. Don't forget, Wizards wants people to play Standard. They could easily put out legendary versions of ABUR Jewels or other things to get around Observe List, but that would just take attention away from Standard, no upside for them. Again, this is another idiot. If this was true, Wizards just wouldn't make Master Sets, or Jewel decks, or any one of the other millions of other non-standard products they've released in the last like 2 years. To every armchair lawyer out there, the reserve list has been modified before, brackets reduced. Don't remember Wizards getting sued. What does your online law degree say about that? Reserve list could be further reduced / premium loophole opened again. And then a reply, they also won't lose a court case if they do reprint the cards. Armchair lawyers are unable to differentiate between getting sued and losing the case. Company policy does not equal a contract. Yeah, I think what Wizards needs to do is, if it really is true that they're not reprinting stuff because of that real legal threat, they need to release like as many details of this as possible. But I can't understand why they wouldn't. At this point, non-tournament players / playgroups should either outright ban reserve list cards or permanently accept reserve list proxies. High quality ones, blah blah blah. Yeah, I mean, if you're not a tournament player, then whatever, I don't care. Do what you want. I mean, so next comment, I mean, legally they can't undo the reserve list. If they did, they'd get the fucking pantsuit off them. They'd either be in a protracted legal battle or have to settle out of court for millions upon millions of dollars. And there's no way in hell Hasbro is going to let them lose that dollars. So I don't know how this guy's info comes from to make these strong claims about millions and millions of dollars. But, you know, we've heard good arguments on the opposite side. By getting rid of the reserve list, that's an opportunity for them to make a lot of money as well. Replying to Saffron still, eek, really missing the mark with that tweet. Okay. Every day the fakes get better, someday the reserve list won't matter because most won't be able to tell. Yep. Wait, people don't do this already? Isn't that why we have modern? Sure, I guess that's partly true. But also modern is PPTQs and things. I guess you could argue that's why Legacy is not a PPTQ format, but sure. Secondary market? What secondary market? We don't acknowledge such things. But here are a bunch of cards we won't print ever again because, yeah, that's a nice tweet. Entirely on Wizards at this point. I can't even blame people for not taking advantage of their idiocy. I feel like this video that I'm making right now would be much better if you could see the screen. But I'm too much of a Luddite to figure out how to do that, so you have to enjoy my mouse. We're getting to the end of this thread. I would trade my extra reserve list, including Power 9 cards, for more Legacy and Vintage players local. Fuck the value, I paid way less for them than they're worth anyway. Yep. It's not everyone else's fault you guys live in magical fury, equality, LGBTQZG land. If you were able to see these trends and had the money, you'd scoop up these cards too. Don't complain because you chose the simple life, bud. Wake up. I mean, it doesn't have to be that expensive. Like, this is just not a good argument either. Like, it's mutually destructive for like every party involved. Yeah, that's a stupid tweet as well. Next tweet, this one looks pretty stupid too. There's nothing wrong with the reserve list, people just keep whining about it. I worked for 3 years to finish my modern and legacy decks, drafted, traded, and saved money for the cards I need. I'm so tired of hearing the reserve list is killing Magic, I'm poor and did it. Yeah, this guy's a fucking idiot as well. Okay, so let's spend a few seconds dissecting this. So like, what's a good analogy for this guy? You know, it's just another case of like people who have a shit experience and then they decide that like everybody else should also like share the shit experience because they went through it. Like, that's just not a good argument in any context. Next thing, hang on, this is another comment from the same idiot from a few comments ago. Is it sad or is it just life? Do you complain you can't afford $1 million homes, private jets and or yachts? You aren't entitled to everything. If you want to play the older formats, get more money. Simple stuff. Yeah, this guy's a confirmed moron. So the reason why this doesn't compare to yachts and cars and things, so like if I go to Ferrari and I like smash my piggy bank on the salesman's desk and I'm like, yo, can I buy a Tortellini 500 for $13.50 or whatever, and he's like, no, sorry, you know, we've determined that we make the most money selling these products at X price, which is, you know, more than I can afford, so we're not going to bring the value down just for you. And I say, well, okay, but the reserve list cards are a completely different animal to that, right? Because I go to Wizards and I smash my piggy bank on the desk and I say, oh, $13.50, that can buy me a pack, right? Is there any set that has Black Lotus in it? And they say no. I say, well, that's something I want to buy. That's something a lot of people want to buy. Why can't you make that for me? You could make money selling me that pack for $13.50. Like, do you see the difference here? Like, it's not comparable. Or like maybe this guy just thinks like we're making a different argument than we really are. But this like just get more money and stop complaining, like that doesn't solve anything. Expand the reserve list, everything from Alara block backwards. I'd like to see his reasoning, but he doesn't provide any, so that's a pretty spicy suggestion. 1,000,000% agree. This is replying to Saffron's original. I think insiders at Wizards have been in-house too long to really get what a major downer is on the game. Yep, that's what I just said. Wizards have been in-house too long to really get what a major downer it is on the game to have a community infected by locusts. Or infested by locusts, yep. No stress to me, I'll just continue to play with fakes. When there are too many fake cards in circulation, Wizards will have to act. That's probably true. At this point, Wizards is basically punishing the player base for its own mistakes. Yep. Wizards could be sued in the US if they print reserve list cards, but I have to say, me as a Legacy player start to get worried as well about the recent buyouts. This could cost the format many players. So the sued part, I'm not sure about. Worry about the buyouts part, yes. Abolishing the reserve list would be Wizards killing their golden goose. Speculation greed is unfortunately what keeps the secondary market afloat. As long as Wizards wants to run their not gambling booster scheme, they need reserve list scarcity to stabilize the market. Does this even make sense? Does this tweet make sense? I'm going to read it again. Abolishing the reserve list would be Wizards killing their golden goose. Speculation greed is unfortunately what keeps the secondary market afloat. As long as Wizards wants to run their not gambling booster scheme, they need reserve list scarcity to stabilize the market. What? What? I'm just so baffled by this tweet, like I can't comprehend it. If you can fathom this tweet, please post a comment to this video and explain it to me. Because either this guy's a complete moron or he's just like on a complete other plane of enlightenment. I just can't follow that argument at all. Ah, the sweet sound of a crying neckbeard. Yeah, okay. Agreed, Legacy needs to die or be killed off and a non-reserve list Legacy created to replace it. I mean, I just don't think that format would take off at this point. People would just move to Modern instead. I believe that Wizards should find a group to playtest Legacy and Vintage to playtest functional upgrades to cards on the reserve list. Cards that are bad or even good but could be better. That way we need not worry about certain cards on the reserve list. That's an interesting idea, but I think it would be very difficult to do. And if you drastically alter the landscape of Legacy, you have the same problem of the suggestion of just Legacy with banning all the reserve list cards, right? Like, the problem is that a lot of people like the format the way that it is, and we don't want to drastically change it too much. Okay, now I've got to the bottom part where we have to show the offensive content. Brace yourselves. Don't be a lunatic if you can't handle the reserve list. It is part of the game. If you don't know anything about the reserve list, you're freaking psycho with no psyche. Okay. A lot of morons coming out of the woodwork. This is the good thing about only having 10 subscribers, right? You don't have to deal with 100 morons. Only 10. Jokes. I love you guys. Please like and subscribe. Okay, there was only one idiot comment in the hidden section. We're done. So, yeah, reserve list is a piece of trash. If it doesn't go, Legacy is just going to become unplayable, and that makes me sad. Wizards could make a lot of money by getting rid of the reserve list to the point where it might offset or like overshoot, totally account for any costs of litigation, but we don't know that because they won't talk about it, and all the other arguments I've hopefully gone over in that long discussion. So if you've stuck with me for all of this, thank you. I just saw that tweet in the whole discussion this morning, and I thought there were like a few interesting good and bad ideas involved, and I wanted to talk about it. Like I say, I think this is one of the most important issues for Magic at the moment. Maybe not for some other people, but from my perspective, it certainly is. So, yeah. Any thoughts? Please comment. like the video if you enjoyed that, if you have anything to add. Probably the next few videos will be back to my just deck techs and stuff, because that's the real interesting part, right? That's what we want to focus on, just playing the game. Like, we shouldn't have to worry about all this secondary rubbish. So take care, guys. Enjoy the week. This is Li-Fi TCG signing out.